So we are starting the book Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. This is the first day that we are doing it. So over to you, Shinita.
The skillful are not obvious. They appear to be simple-minded. Those who know this know the patterns of the absolute. To know the patterns is the subtle power. The subtle power moves all things and has no name.
So this is again, oops, sorry. So this is very important. Okay, the last line. What he says is the subtle power moves all things and has no name. So I've spoken about this before, that when we draw a line, I always ask in the Vastu program, does this have energy? But when I attended the biogeometry program, they said that where does the thought to draw the line come from? Right? It comes from below the line. And that is where the subtle power exists. That is where the subtle power is. And the point is that according to the biogeometry principle, there is a force field which is there before the line. And we can actually, even using the pendulums, the biogeometry pendulums, we are able to tell you where did you start the line and where it finished. Because the quality of energy when you start doing something is very different from when you finish doing it. Okay, so he says the subtle power moves all things and has no name. Because when you go into the formless, there is no name. The subtle power is very simple. So people who are really competent, they don't have to hako, they don't have to tell that they are competent. Their competence will automatically show by the thing that they are doing. So they turn out to be the really competent people are generally simple people. Okay. And they are connected to that subtle power. And that's how everything works around.
Imagine, what if you had access to a simple yes or no answer to any question you wish to ask? A demonstrably true answer, any question. Think about it. There's the obvious. Jane is seeing another guy, yes or no? Johnny is telling the truth about school, yes or no? But it's only a short step to this is a safe investment, yes or no? Or this career is worthy of my pursuit, yes or no?
So in our lives, if we had a process by we could get yes and no answers for ourselves, then it can become a really powerful process.
What if everyone had such access? Staggering implications suggest themselves immediately. Think again. What would happen to our ponderous and all too often flawed judicial system if there were a clear, confirmable answer to the proposition, John Doe is guilty as charged? Yes?
So again, what is he saying over here? That today, whenever we are doing any kind of judgment, right, in the judicial system, it is very, very subjective. It is not objective. But if we could develop a process by which we can bring objectivity to the subjective, then it automatically becomes very, very powerful. So whether someone is guilty or no is a yes or a no. So it becomes very, very easy.
What would happen to politics as we know it if all of us could ask the question, Candidate X honestly intends to fulfill this campaign promise, yes or no? and all of us got the same answer.
Now, this is very important. All of us must get the same answer. So if we have a process by which all of us can access the correct answer, then it becomes very, very powerful, because then there can be no ambiguity. Nothing is hidden. Everything is very obvious.
Period. And what would happen to advertising? Period. You get the idea, but the idea gets bigger fast. What happens to nationalism? Nation X is in fact dedicated to the overthrow of democracy. To government, this bill does in fact protect the rights of citizens. What happens to the check is in the mail? If, as has been said, man learned to lie an hour after he learned to talk, then a phenomenon such as we are discussing would be the genesis of the most fundamental change in human knowledge since the beginning of society. The transformations it would wreak in fields from communications to ethics in our most basic concept is every detail of daily existence would be so profound that it is difficult even to conceive what life would be like in a subsequent new era of truth. The world as we know it would be irrevocably changed to its very roots.
So what is he saying? That if everyone knows the truth and nothing is hidden, right, then the way that we live life would totally change, because we are, the survival instinct makes us lie many times to protect ourselves. Now, the moment that instinct is gone and everything is truth, everything is black and white, there is no ambiguity, the way that we live life will become very different, because everything will start becoming, everyone will be aware of everything. So nothing will be hidden anymore.
In the late 70s, Dr. John Diamond refined this specialty into a new discipline he called behavioral kinesiology. Dr. Diamond's startling discovery was that indicator muscles would strengthen or weaken in the presence of positive or negative emotional and intellectual stimuli, as well as physical stimuli. A smile will make you test strong. The statement, I hate you, will make you test weak.
So anything that is uplifting will make you strong. Anything that is depleting will make you weak. This is what kinesiology is all about. Okay, over here it's not there, but this process is called kinesiology. And Dr. John Diamond actually discovered this process. And it is also called muscle testing. So kinesiology as a definition, the study of muscles and their movement, especially as applied to physical conditioning and movement, right? So whenever something is making you weak, your muscles will weaken. Whenever something is making you strong, your muscles will become strong. So using that principle, you can start to understand what is good for you and what is not good for you.
Before we go any further, let us explain in detail exactly how one tests, especially as the reader will certainly wish to try this himself. Here is Dr. Diamond's outline from his 1979 book, Your Body Doesn't Lie, of the procedure adapted by him from the classic description in H.O. Kendall's Muscles Testing and Function. It takes two people to perform a kinesiological test. Choose a friend or a family member for testing. We'll call him or her your subject. Number 1. Have the subject stand erect, right arm relaxed at his side, left arm held out parallel to the floor, elbow straight. You may use the other arm if you wish. Number 2. Face your subject and place your left hand on his right shoulder to steady him. Then place your right hand on the subject's extended left arm, just above the wrist. Tell the subject you are going to try to push his arm down as he resists with all his strength. 4. Now push down on his arm fairly quickly, firmly and evenly. The idea is to push just hard enough to test the spring and bounce in the arm, not so hard that the muscle becomes fatigued. It is not a question of who is stronger, but of whether the muscle can lock the shoulder joint against the push.
So very clearly, oh, sorry. So very clearly, what is it? You have to stand the subject will stand with the left hand or the right hand out. Okay, so let's say the subject is standing like this. You will put your other hand on the shoulder, on the right shoulder, and with your left hand you will your left hand will be on his shoulder to steady him, and then with the other hand you are going to push his hand down and to test how much resistance is there, what is the bounce. Okay, this is the standard procedure. There are other procedures, we'll come to that, but this is the basic test which is there to be able to do muscle testing.
Assuming there is no physical problem with the muscle and the subject is in a normal, relaxed state of mind, receiving no extraneous stimuli. For this reason, it is important that the tester not smile or otherwise interact with the subject. The muscle will stay strong. The arm will remain locked. If the test is repeated in the presence of a negative stimulus, for instance, artificial sweetener, although you are pushing down no harder than before, the muscle will not be able to resist the pressure and the subject's arm will fall to his side.
So what does this imply? Sorry. So what does this imply? Okay, you're not meant to be interacting with the person with on whom you're testing something. You're not to smile, the person is not to smile. Because as soon as you smile, you change the parameters, right? When you change the parameters, your testing will not be effective. So you have to be in a neutral state. You have to be in that zero state where you're not thinking, you're just specifically testing for whatever you're testing for. That's it. So that's why clarity of mind in this process also becomes important. So what are you testing for? That is what you need to focus on. Now, when you press the hand, you will get a certain resistance. So you gauge that resistance. Then you put some maybe sugar in the hand of the person who you are testing, and again press the hand down. You will find that anything that weakens the arm will not be able to resist as much. If you put sugar, you will find that you will weaken. That's why sugar is not considered good for us in most cases. In some cases, it may be different because sugar may be good for some person also. It's not absolute. It's not an absolute, right? So we have to test specifically for everything for each person if you want to test.
A striking aspect of Diamond's research was the uniformity of response among his subjects. Diamond's results were predictable, repeatable, universal. This was so even when no rational link existed between stimulus and response. For totally undetermined reasons, certain abstract symbols caused all subjects to test weak, others the opposite. Some results were perplexing. Certain pictures with no overtly positive or negative content would cause all subjects to test weak, while other neutral pictures caused all subjects to test strong. And some results were food for considerable surmise, whereas virtually all classical music and most pop music, including classic rock and roll, caused a universally strong response. The hard or metal rock that first gained popularity in the late 70s produced a universally weak response.
So even music can make you strong or weak. So what is the kind of music you're hearing can have an effect on your physiology, your psychology, your emotional content, your mental content, as well as your spiritual content. So over here, very clearly, he says classical music and pop music. It was uplifting. It was positive. It strengthened the body. Hard rock and hard metal weakened the body, right? So all the music which is there can also create an issue for you. So this is something that we must understand. What are we associating with? What are we talking about becomes very, very important. Sucheta, please stop annotizing. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
There was one other phenomenon which Diamond noted in passing, though devoting no deeper analysis to its extraordinary implications. Subjects listening to tapes of known deceits, Lyndon Johnson perpetrating the Tonkin Gulf hoax, Edward Kennedy stonewalling the Chappaquiddick incident universally tested weak, while listening to recordings of demonstrably true statements, they universally tested strong. This was the starting point of the work of the author of this volume, the well known psychiatrist and physician David R. Hawkins. In 1975, Dr. Hawkins began research on the kinesiological response to truth and falsehood.
So when someone is saying a lie, which is not something that he is meaning, right? He's not totally with it, and you're hearing that, it will make you weak. When someone is saying the truth, when someone is associated totally with what they are saying, they're committed to it, you will automatically test strong. So again, what kind of speech you are hearing? What is it that you're hearing is going to affect you? So like when we are watching TV, we are watching all these discussions, etc., it is bound to have an effect on us. So we have to be very careful as to what we are allowing our conscious awareness to connect with, because it is creating a problem. So people who were lying and you were hearing that speech, it was going to weaken you. People who were saying the truth and you were hearing that speech is going to make you strong, right? We need to understand this. So what are we bringing into our awareness becomes extremely important over here.
It had established that test subjects did not need any conscious acquaintance with the substance or issue being tested. In double-blind studies and in mass demonstrations involving entire lecture audiences, subjects universally tested weak in response to unmarked envelopes containing artificial sweetener and strong to identical placebo envelopes. The same naive response appeared in testing intellectual values.
So what was he saying? Now there was a hall, right? In the hall, what they did, they stuck envelopes under the table, under the chairs, or they put envelopes on the chairs, right? Some of them had artificial sweeteners. Some of them did not have artificial sweeteners. But when subjects took them in their hand, all the envelopes which had artificial sweeteners, all the subjects tested weak. And all the subject who had the placebo means that thing is not there. It is many times, when you're given a medicine, you're given a placebo where the medicine is not given, a sugar pill may be given, or some kind of a substitute which looks like the pill is given to you. So you think that you've had the medicine, but actually you've not had the medicine. So the envelopes are absolutely similar. but they could actually test which ones had the artificial sweetener and which one did not. So this becomes very important. Even if you do not know what is in an envelope, it will affect your system. So when you look at it from this angle, suppose you get a letter from someone. Now, if you do this kinesiology test, you can actually know whether it is good news or bad news simply by doing the test. If it is bad news, it is detrimental for you, or it's not good for you, your muscles will weaken. If it is good for you, your muscles will strengthen. Okay. So the point here is that our body is extremely sensitive. The unfortunate thing is that we have stopped listening to our body. The more we can listen to our body, the body is so fine, it has got such high sensitivity that it is not funny. In fact, in the Vastu program, when we used to conduct the physical programs, all the participants could start telling just by their breathing and how they were feeling in their body, where there was a depleting energy field and where there was an uplifting energy field. Every one of them could literally tell you, right? The point is of awareness. The more awareness we bring to our awareness of our body, or we become more aware of our physical body and what the body is telling us, we can get a lot of information for ourselves.
What seems to be at work is a form of communal consciousness, spiritus mundi, or as Hawkins calls it, following Jung, a database of consciousness. The phenomenon seen so commonly in other social animals, whereby a fish swimming at one edge of a school will turn instantaneously when its fellows a quarter mile away flee a predator, pertains in some subconscious way to our species also.
So, what is he talking about over here? This is also to do with the morphogenic field. We've spoken about the morphogenic field previously. This was a coin which was termed by Rupert Sheldrake, where there is a database of information and we are all connected to that information. So we get to know stuff before we actually consciously know it. So a shoal of fish can be a few kilometers long, and on one end there's a predator or someone is attacking, the entire shoal will turn in one shot, right? And it is no way that communication can go from the fish at this end to the fish at the other end, right? But the information gets transferred. It is a part of the morphogenic field, or this combined consciousness with which we all have access to.
There are simply too many documented instances of individuals having intimate acquaintance with information experienced firsthand by remote strangers for us to deny that there are forms of shared knowledge other than those achieved by rational consciousness. Or perhaps, more simply, the same spark of inner sub rational wisdom that can discriminate healthy from unhealthy, can discriminate true from false.
So this is something, this discrimination between truth and false, getting answers for ourselves without our conscious awareness is what we are experiencing when people go into the excursion workshop and they're experiencing Focus 12. And of course, when we are going into the higher focus levels in the graduate programs, that time you can actually access this data, that feeling, that underlying uh, ehsas, you could call it, of what is the path you need to take, whether this is right or this is wrong. That feel, that tasir of the energy, you will start to perceive when we start going into these higher states of consciousness. And this information is actually available to everyone. It's just that we need to connect with it. The more we connect with it, the more apparent it will start becoming for us.
One highly suggestive element of this phenomenon is the binary nature of the response. Hawkins found that questions must be phrased so that the answer is very clearly yes or no, like a nerve synapse that is on or off, like the most basic cellular forms of knowledge, like so much of what our cutting edge physicists tell us is the essential nature of universal energy. Is the human brain, at some primal level, a wondrous computer linked with a universal energy field that knows far more than it knows it knows?
So again, when we are asking the question is an art. Okay. The more finely we develop that art, the better answers we will get. Again, this is something that is experienced very well when we are using the one breath technique and we are going into that expanded state of focus 12 in the excursion to get answers for ourselves. Clarity of the question is one of the most important things. You cannot hold on to the question. You have to be willing to accept what the answer comes. So you have to have clarity in your mind. And when you do that, the answers that can come are very, very phenomenal. And it will just download many times, right? So what he's saying over here, the human brain at some primal level is a wondrous computer linked with a universal energy field that knows far more than it knows, right? So it's like a network. Today, all our computers, we have a certain amount of data in our hard disk. But using the internet, we are connected, for example, to Google Baba. Now, Google Baba knows literally everything, right? You type something and you'll get the information. So this is an analogy of what is being spoken over here. Our brains are like a transmitter and receiver, and we are connected to that universal consciousness which knows everything. We are only limited by our conscious awareness being able to perceive and connect and download that data. Now, this is something that we read in Zero Limits, where it was clearly said that if a conscious mind is processing 40 bits of data, the subconscious mind is processing 40 million bits of data, right? So naturally, our subconscious mind knows much more than our conscious mind. So the big guy knows a lot more than the small guy. Now, this big guy is still limited. There is something beyond that. So what he's talking about here is that our conscious mind, if we can connect to that larger database, we can know everything. Nothing is hidden. So when you have these seers, like let's say Nostradamus or whatever, they were going into altered states of consciousness, connecting with that larger database and bringing down probabilities. So when you're doing a future prediction, it is all about probabilities. What is the probable future or the most probable future, right? Because your future also depends on your choices, which is again dependent on our connectivity to be able to figure out what is our actual life purpose over here. So the more we connect into that expanded consciousness, the more we can live life with more awareness.
Be that as it may, as Dr. Hawkins' research continued, his most fertile discovery was a means of calibrating a scale of relative truth by which intellectual positions, statements, or ideologies could be rated on a range of 1 to 1000.
So basically what he did, he created a scale, right, from 1 to 1000. So what is the level of consciousness with which you are operating? He managed to calibrate it.
One can ask, this item, book, philosophy, teacher, calibrates at 200, yes or no? At 250, yes or no? And so on, until the point of common weak response determines the calibration. The enormous implication of these calibrations was that for the first time in human history, ideological validity could be appraised as an innate quality in any subject.
So basically using that scale, you can rate anything, right? If you are having a thought, what is that? What is the level of consciousness that that thought is operating in? If I'm reading a book, what is the rate? What is the level of consciousness at which the book is operating at? You could say, you could talk about a person. What is the level of consciousness that this person is operating at? Right. Now, for us, we may be operating at different levels of consciousness in many different things that we do. So the idea here is to constantly evolve. We need to constantly focus on evolution to start operating at higher and higher states of consciousness, because that is the ultimate aim of coming here, to grow, to expand, right? And the higher the state of consciousness with which we operate, the more evolved we start to become.
Through 20 years of similar calibrations, Hawkins was able to analyze the full spectrum of the levels of human consciousness, developing a fascinating map of the geography of man's experience. This anatomy of consciousness produces a profile of the entire human condition, allowing a comprehensive analysis of the emotional and spiritual development of individuals, societies, and the race in general. So profound and far reaching a view provides not only a new understanding of man's journey in the universe, but also a guide to all of us as to where we and our neighbors are on the ladder of spiritual enlightenment and on our own personal journeys to become who we could be.
So again, it allows us to be, it puts into perspective, where are we operating from? What is the state of consciousness we are operating from? What is the state of consciousness people around us are operating from? And again, the idea being that once you realize what is the state of consciousness you're operating at, you want to evolve, you want to grow, you want to start working at a higher state of consciousness.
In this volume, Dr. Hawkins brings these fruits of decades of research and insight into the penetrating illumination of revolutionary discoveries in advanced particle physics and non-linear dynamics. For the first time in our Western intellectual record, he shows the cold light of science is confirming what mystics and saints have always said about the self, God, and the very nature of reality. This vision of being, essence, and divinity presents a picture of man's relation to the universe that is unique in its capacity to satisfy both soul and reason. There is a rich intellectual and spiritual harvest here, much that you can take and much more that you can give yourself. Turn the page, the future starts now. E. Wallen, editor, Bard Press, Arizona.
So what is he saying over here? That in this book, David Hawkins connects science and spirituality, which is what we are looking at doing in awareness also.
Preface. To explain that which is simple can be difficult indeed. Much of this book is devoted to the process of making the simple obvious. If we can understand even one simple thing in depth, we will have greatly expanded our capacity for comprehending the nature of the universe and life itself. Kinesiology is now a well-established science based on testing of an all or none muscle response to stimuli. A positive stimulus provokes a strong muscle response. A negative stimulus results in a demonstrable weakening of the test muscle. Clinical kinesiological muscle testing as a diagnostic technique has found widespread verification over the last 25 years.
So many times kinesiology can also be used to figure out whether a medicine is good for you or not good for you.
Goodhart's original research on the subject was given wider application by Dr. John Diamond, whose books brought the subject to the public. Diamond determined that this positive or negative response occurs with stimuli, both physical and mental.
So again, if you're thinking of something, it will have a physical response. And if you're feeling something, it will have a mental response.
The research reflected in this volume has taken Dr. Diamond's technique several steps further through the discovery that this kinesiologic response reflects a capacity of the human organism to differentiate not only positive from negative stimuli, but also anabolic, life enhancing, from catabolic, life consuming, and most dramatically, true from false.
So again, this testing method can test what is good for you, what is bad for you, what is the truth and what is false. Again, a lot also depends on your belief system.
The test itself is simple, rapid, and relatively foolproof. A positive muscle reaction occurs in response to a statement, which is objectively true. A negative response occurs if the test subject is presented with a false statement. This phenomenon occurs independently of the test subject's own opinion or knowledge of the topic, and the response has proven cross-culturally valid in any population and consistent through time. The test results thus fulfill the scientific requirement of replication and, therefore, reliable verification by any investigator.
So what he's saying is that the test results always come the same, no matter who is being tested.
This technique provides, for the first time in human history, an objective basis for distinguishing truth from falsehood, which is totally verifiable across time with randomly selected naive test subjects. Moreover, we found that this testable phenomenon can be used to calibrate human levels of consciousness so that an arbitrary logarithmic scale of whole numbers emerges, stratifying the relative power of levels of consciousness in all areas of human experience. Exhaustive investigation has resulted in a calibrated scale of consciousness in which the log of whole numbers from 1 to 1000 calibrates the degree of power of all possible levels of human awareness.
So again, the calibration is from 1 to 1000 with various levels or set points in that calibration.
The millions of calibrations which confirmed this discovery further disclosed a stratification of levels of power in human affairs, revealing a remarkable distinction between power and force and their respective qualities.
So this is very important, right? What are the qualities of power and what are the qualities of force? This, when we calibrate on that scale of 1 to 1000 or the scale of consciousness, we can actually understand where you are operating from. Are you operating from force or you are operating from power? Force requires effort. Power requires no effort. It generally becomes effortless.
This in turn led to a comprehensive reinterpretation of human behavior in order to identify the invisible energy fields that control it. The calibrated scale was found to coincide with sub-levels of the hierarchy of the perennial philosophy, correlations with emotional and intellectual phenomena in sociology, clinical psychology, and traditional spirituality, immediately suggested themselves.
So it encompasses that entire information of the physical, the mental, the emotional, as well as the spiritual.
The calibrated scale has been examined here in light of current discoveries in advanced theoretical physics and the nonlinear dynamics of chaos theory.
So chaos theory is that in spite of the chaos, there's always an underlying principle which is below the chaos. So nothing is actually in chaos. Everything has some kind of organization behind it.
Calibrated levels, we suggest, represent powerful attractor fields within the domain of consciousness itself that dominate human existence and therefore define content, meaning, and value, and serve as organizing energies for widespread patterns of human behavior.
Now, this is an important thing. Represent powerful attractor fields. So the level of consciousness with which you are operating, that is what you're going to be attracting into your field. So your level of consciousness represents what you're going to be experiencing in life, in all aspects of your life.
This stratification of attractor fields according to corresponding levels of consciousness provides a new paradigm for recontextualizing the human experience throughout all time. Practically, by accessing data to which there has been heretofore no avenue of approach, our method promises both great value in researching history and enormous possible benefit for man's future. In attempting to emphasize the value of this technique as a research tool, examples have been given of its potential uses in a wide range of human activities, speculatively in art, history, commerce, politics, medicine, sociology, and the natural sciences, pragmatically in marketing, advertising, research, and development, and empirically in psychological, philosophic, and religious inquiry. Specific applications have been suggested in such diverse fields as criminology, intelligence, addictionology, and self-improvement.
So putting it simply, right, the application of the levels of consciousness can be applied to any field, you name it, right? There's a painting. What was the level of consciousness with which the painting was made? There is a book. What is the level of consciousness with the book was written? Within a book, you can even calibrate every sentence. You can calibrate every word as to what is the level of consciousness with which that is operating. So any aspect of your life, you can calibrate it.
But further uses and extrapolations of the research method detailed herein have been barely hinted at. Although the results described here are the product of 20 years of investigation and millions of calibrations on thousands of subjects by teams of investigators, this book represents only a beginning exploration of the method's potential to enhance our knowledge in all the arts and sciences. Perhaps most important is its promise as an aid in spiritual growth and maturation to the most advanced levels of consciousness, even enlightenment itself.
So again, since we can calibrate anything, we can actually calibrate what is the level of consciousness that you are operating at. What is your spiritual connection? What level of spirituality are you operating at?
By use of this kinesiological testing procedure described herein, unlimited information about any subject past or present, is universally available. But the realization that everything is knowable about anything or anyone, anywhere, at any point in time, creates at first a paradigm shock. This reaction arises generally from realization of the non-locality, impersonality, and universality of consciousness itself, and specifically from the realization of the observability of one's own thoughts and motivations, their transparency across time, that one's every thought and action leave an undeliverable trace forever in the universe can be an unsettling thought.
So, putting it simply, everything is known, nothing is hidden. Whatever you're thinking and doing leaves an imprint in the universal consciousness and is accessible for time immortal, right? So you cannot erase anything. Everything is recoverable and everything is calibratable. So you can calibrate everything, whatever action. So an action that you're taking today can be calibrated 100 years later as to what level of consciousness did you actually do that particular action or where you were operating from. So when nothing is hidden, everything is visible. Okay, whatever you do is recorded in that consciousness, in that universal consciousness. It can become unsettling. Why? Because many times we think that we are bluffing people, we are bluffing the other guy, but most of the time we are landing up bluffing ourselves, because at the end of the day nothing is hidden. So the more you can operate from truth, the more you can operate from higher states of consciousness, the better off you will be. We come to that story where Buddha gave a chicken. I mean, they say the chicken, I don't know whether he gave a chicken or not, but he gave a chicken to many of his disciples and he said, go and slaughter it when no one is watching you, right? Only one disciple came back with a chicken, said that wherever I may cut the chicken, but I am watching, so how can there be no one? Because I am someone. So whether you like it or not, whatever you are doing, you are watching and you are connected with the universal consciousness field. So even if you are attempting to hoodwink someone else, you cannot hoodwink yourself. You cannot hoodwink the universal consciousness. So everything is known. Please get this right. Nothing is hidden. If you have the eyes to see, the ears to see, hear, the nose to smell, the tongue to taste, and the fingers to feel, everything is known. Nothing is hidden.
As in the case of the discovery of radio waves or X-rays, a sudden expansion of our awareness of the workings of the universe not only allows but demands a recontextualization of our worldview. Implications of new knowledge require a reworking of old ideas to form a larger context. Though it may occasion some intellectual stress, such scientific recontextualization of human behavior can expose the basic structures that underlie personal and social problems, thereby revealing their solutions.
So, we can see only so much, right? But the electromagnetic spectrum is that big. Our awareness is only so much. So there's a lot beyond what we cannot perceive. Now, as we expand our awareness, the way that we are looking at something or the way that something occurred to us is going to shift. So the more we expand in consciousness, the more changes start to occur in our own way of looking at things. So a recontextualization has to take place with an expansion of awareness.
Because the subject matter is, in fact, extraordinarily simple, it is difficult to present in a world enamored of complexity. Despite our mistrust of simplification, We may see two general classes of people in the world, believers and non-believers. To the non-believers, everything is false until proven true. To the believers, everything said in good faith is probably true unless it is proven false. The pessimistic position of cynical skepticism stems from fear. The more optimistic manner of accepting information arises from self-confidence. Either
So again, when you look at it, you'll have two groups of people, right? People who believe, people who don't believe. And ultimately, there are basically two primordial emotions that we are operating from. One is fear and the other is love. Now, when we come to the resilience grade, you will find that fear is always on the left side of the grid and love is always on the right side of the grid. So which state of consciousness are you operating from? Which side of the grid you are operating from again comes back into the forefront.
Either style works and each has its pros and cons. I have been faced, therefore, with the problem of presenting my data in a manner that will satisfy both approaches. This book is, therefore, oxymoronic in style, written to facilitate both so-called left and right brain comprehension. In actuality, we know things by a holistic pattern recognition. The easiest way to grasp a whole new concept is by familiarity. This kind of understanding is encouraged by a style of writing characterized by closure. Instead of using only sparse adjectives or examples to express thoughts, they are instead run out and completed by use of repetition. The concept is then done and the mind is left at ease. Such an approach is also desirable because the mind that reads chapter 3 will not be the same as the mind that read chapter 1.
Okay. So what is the meaning over here? We've got two sides of the brain, the left and the right. Shimangla, don't take it up, please. We've got the left and the right side of the brain, and the two brains operate in distinct styles, right? So over here, what he's saying is that in this book, he is taking care of both the left and the right brain. Now, the best way to learn is by repetition. So there will be a lot of repetition in the book, which will allow us to grasp the idea better. And as we grow, as we go through anything, the more information we have, the more awareness we gather, it constantly changes us. Now, we've been doing a lot of stuff since May last year or March last year. I'm sure all of you have changed in some way, right? After experiencing this, after expanding your knowledge. So he says that the mind which is reading the chapter 1 is very different from the mind which reads chapter 3. So that's why repetition again becomes important, because the way that you're looking at something, your perspective is bound to shift.
For that matter, the idea of having to start from chapter 1 and read progressively to the end is merely a fixed left brain concept. This is the pedestrian path of Newtonian physics, based on a limited and limiting view of the world in which all events supposedly happen in an ABC sequence.
So in Newtonian way of looking, right, everything moves in a linear fashion. It moves in a progression, right? So A will go to B, so chapter 1 will go to chapter 2 to chapter 3. This is what the basic way in which we normally read. And we are going to read in that. In spite of what he is going to say, we are going to go through the book chapter-wise in the Newtonian way.
This form of myopia arises from an outdated paradigm of reality. A wider and far more comprehensive view draws not only upon the essence of the most advanced physics, mathematics, and nonlinear theory, but as well upon intuitions that can be experientially validated by anyone.
So the other way is the Gestalt way, right? It's the non-linear way where you're jumping from chapter to chapter, using your intuition and then going through the book. So many times you will have to use intuition. Like, for example, I have a lot of books in my library, right? Many times I'll suddenly stop reading a book and then I'll pick it up after 2 years and I find that where I left off, it is exactly where I need to go after 2 years of gathering more information from other places. So now that is that intuitive ability to be able to understand when you should do something and when you should leave it. So all these factors are there, but in spite of what he is saying, we are still going to read the book in linear fashion, not in non-linear fashion.
In general, the challenge in presenting this material lies in the paradox of comprehending non-linear concepts in a linear, sentence-by-sentence structure. The fields of science from which the data emerged are of themselves complex and difficult enough. Advanced theoretical physics and the mathematics thereof, nonlinear dynamics, chaos theory, and its mathematics, advanced behavioral kinesiology, neurobiology, turbulence theory, as well as the philosophical considerations of epistemology and ontology. Beyond this, it was necessary to address the nature of human consciousness itself, an uncharted area at the perimeter of which the sciences have all drawn back. To conclusively comprehend such subjects from a purely intellectual viewpoint would be a staggering enterprise requiring a lifetime of study. Instead of essaying so formidable a task, I have tried to extract the essence of each subject and work only with these essences.
So what he's saying is extracting the core of whatever topic we are looking at and then putting it into a scale of consciousness. Where is it operating from? Or simply testing it, right? And it becomes very simple then, rather than getting into details.
Even a rudimentary attempt to explain the workings of the testing technique fundamental to this book, which seems initially to transcend known laws of the universe, inevitably leads us into the intellectual territories of advanced theoretical physics, nonlinear dynamics, and chaos theory.
So because we are not looking at it from the Newtonian way, we are looking at it from a higher state of consciousness. So what was a theoretical physicist? So Einstein was a theoretical physicist where he did the experiment in his head, right? He actually visualized the experiment in his head, but it was not physically possible because of the technology at that time to actually prove what his theory actually said. But ultimately, after a few decades, his theory started getting proved. So nonlinear dynamics is, again, it's not A to B to C. It is A to B to C, B to A to C, C to A to B. It's all happening at the same time. It's not moving in a structured way. And as I explained about chaos theory, the chaos theory states that there is an organized intelligence behind everything. So at the surface, it may seem there is chaos, but underneath there is organization. So all these things are being collected into this particular way of looking at things.
I have therefore attempted, as much as possible, to present these subjects in non technical terms. There is no need to worry that some erudite intellectual capacity is required to digest this material. It is not. We will circle around the same concepts over and over until they are obvious. Each time we return to comment on an example, greater comprehension will occur. This kind of learning is like surveying new terrain in an airplane. On the first pass, it all looks unfamiliar. The second time around, we spot some points of reference. The third time, it starts to make sense. And finally, we gain familiarity through simple exposure. The inborn pattern recognition mechanism of the mind takes care of the rest.
So again, repetition, right? Looking at the same thing from different perspectives allows us to comprehend the matter in front of us in a more deeper and a much better way. Now it's seeming very complicated here, okay? But when we get into the real theory, it's not complicated. You'll find that there is elegant simplicity in what he is actually talking about. And the testing process is very simple and pretty, dramatic, because it can really tell you a lot.
To quell my own fear that perhaps, despite my best efforts, the reader might not get the essential message of the study, I will spell it out in advance. The individual human mind is like a computer terminal connected to a giant database. The database is human consciousness itself, of which our own consciousness is merely an individual expression, but with its roots in the common consciousness of all mankind. This database is the realm of genius, because to be human is to participate in the database. Everyone, by virtue of his birth, has access to genius. The unlimited information contained in the database has now been shown to be readily available to anyone in a few seconds at any time and in any place. This is indeed an astonishing discovery, bearing the power to change lives, both individually and collectively, to a degree never yet anticipated.
So again, we are all connected to that database. The more we can become aware of it, the more we can expand our level of awareness, the more we can comprehend the downloads which are taking place, the more aware we will automatically become, because we all have access to that database. When we go into Focus 27 in the expanded states, we go and see that there's a library, there's a planning center. Everything is being meticulously planned for us. And we are the ones in that state of expanded consciousness who have actually desired what we are experiencing today. So what we saw again in Zero Limits, that we are actually responsible for everything that is happening to us. When we connect into this unlimited database, we start to actually experience and accept it.
The database transcends time and space and all limitations of individual consciousness. This distinguishes it as a unique tool for future research and opens as yet undreamed of areas for possible investigation. It holds forth the prospect of the establishment of an objective basis for human values, behaviors, and belief systems. The information obtained by this method reveals a new context for understanding human behavior and a new paradigm for validating objective truth.
So what is he saying here? When we can start to identify what is the level of consciousness with which something is operating, so then we can actually understand the why of why that person is behaving in a particular way. So when you see the start of the book, the hidden determinants of human behavior. So why is a person behaving in a particular way, which to you operating at a different level of consciousness may feel idiotic, but because that person is operating at a certain level of consciousness, he has no control over it, right? Unless he shifts his level of consciousness, he will continue to operate in that same particular way.
Because the technique itself can be used by anyone, anywhere, at any time, it has the capacity to initiate a new era of human experience based on observable and verifiable truth.
So what is he saying here is that if you are able to connect to what is true and what is not true, you can objectify it and observe it at the same time, then automatically we are empowering ourselves to be able to behave in a particular way. So then we can start taking real charge of the life of our lives. What is the way in which we want to live life? What is the way in what is the state of consciousness in which we want to live life? We can actually start working with it, right? We can actually start controlling it with our conscious mind, because again we are starting to expand the small guy to encompass the big guy. So we are making that more neural connections into the big guy so that we can garner more information.
We have at our fingertips a means of accurately distinguishing truth from falsehood, workable from unworkable, benevolent from malign. We can illuminate the hidden forces hitherto overlooked that determine human behavior. We have at our disposal a means of finding answers to previously unresolved personal and social problems. Falsehood need no longer hold sway over our lives.
So again, this is a powerful technique which we can use in our day-to-day life. I think we can stop here. Okay, it's already 21.